Good day guys, and welcome back to our tutorial series on literature, where today we'll be analyzing the poem The Journey of the Magi. Journey of the Magi. The Magi here refers to the wise men who visited Jesus when he was born. So today we'll be analyzing this poem, and the poem was written by American poet C.S. Eliot. And worthy of mentioning is that he won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948. T.S. Eliot won the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1948. So we'll now move to the poem. In structure, the poem is a free verse. That means it contains no specific meter or rhyme scheme. It is a free verse. Then the poem contains 43 lines. Divided into 3 stanzas. The stanzas do not contain the same number of lines. The stanzas contain varying number of lines. Now we'll look at the stanza by stanza analysis. The poem is a religious poem about the wise men who visited Jesus when he was born, the King of the Jews. Now for our stanza by stanza analysis, stanza 1 talks about the experiences the Magi encountered on their journey to baby Jesus. We see the hardships and pain they endured. We see the weather was cold. They were all tired, including the animals they used for transportation. The camels were also tired. And then when it got too tough, the camel men were running away. The cities and towns they passed through were hostile to them. And the villagers kept overcharging them, which eventually made them to journey through the night instead of looking for shelter. Despite the weather conditions, they chose to journey through the night, and all the while they were unsure whether to keep going or to return home based on the hardships they were enduring. And then in stanza 2, we see that there is a shift, a slight shift. The Magi have passed the cold regions and got into a temperate valley where there is a running stream and even a water mill in the dark. These conditions were very different from the one they just passed through. So they get to a tavern, ask for information, still didn't get any info, and then they continue their journey, arriving just in time, but not so happy about the situation of the place. Because according to the poem says, finding the place, as you may say in brackets, satisfactory. So that's not a term you would use to describe something you're overly excited about. So they were not too happy about the situation of things they met. After all that journey and everything, you find out that this is where you've been, struggling to come to. So the Magi were not too happy about the situation of things. In stanza 3, which is the final stanza, the speaker then stops his description of the journey. This time he gives us his personal opinion about the experience they went through. He thinks it was worth it, because we see that in I would do it again. So he thinks the experience, the journey, everything was worth it. And then he goes on to ask a rhetorical question. He's wondering if they were led there for a bet or a debt. It was obvious, like he was sure that there was a bet. But the bet also felt like death to them, because it meant death of their old selves, death of the life as they knew it, and a new one, and them living a new life. We see that in the lines, but no longer at ease here in the old dispensation with an alien people clutching their gods. So when the Magi returned from their journey to see baby Jesus, they now felt out of place. The life they knew before felt alien to them. Then the poem ends with the Magi wishing for another death, whether it was his own death that would, reunite him with Christ, because Christians believe it is in death we gain eternal life, or it was talking about the death of Christ on the cross, which will usher in a new Christian era. We do not know. But the poem ends with the sentence, I should be glad of another death. Next, we look at the themes explored in the poem by the writer. Chief among them is the theme of suffering. The entire first stanza, which contains more lines than the second and third stanza, is all about the suffering the Magi had to endure on their journey to meet the infant Jesus. Even in the third line, we still see elements of suffering where the Magi describes the birth of Jesus as a bitter and hard agony to them. So the theme of suffering was well explored in the journey of the Magi. We also see the theme of doubt. Towards the end of the first stanza, the Magi struggle with the decision of whether to continue the journey or return in the face of all the suffering and hardship they were having to endure. We also see the theme of doubt. Towards the end of the first stanza, the Magi struggle with whether they should continue the journey or return in the face of all the suffering and hardship they were having to endure. The stanza ends with the voices singing in our ears that this was all folly. So they kept thinking to themselves, should we continue? Should we go on? Is this worth it? Isn't this foolishness or recklessness like that? So there was a theme of doubt in the journey of the Magi. Then we also see the theme of spiritual rebirth. The birth of Christ signified the death of the Magi's old selves. At first, they were struggling. There was confusion. He was wondering if they were there for a birth or a death. He told himself that, okay, I have seen birth, I have seen death, and I thought they were different. But this one is, the birth is not looking different. It is like a bitter and hard agony to him. So he knows the feelings one usually felt when there was a birth was totally different from when there was a death. But now it's as though this birth is giving exactly the same feeling as when there is a death, simply because it signified the death of his old self. But then later we see the acceptance. I should be glad of another death. So I think the poet is trying to tell us that the struggles are part of the process to spiritual rebirth. So the theme of spiritual rebirth is represented in the journey of the Magi. Then we look at the poetic devices. Personification. Giving human attributes to non-human human things, and the city is hostile. The town unfriendly. So these are attributes of humans given to non-human beings, like town. The town itself is not unfriendly, but the people in the town that were unfriendly. But the poet just uses the town unfriendly, which falls under the literary device personification. Then we have litotes. Not a moment too soon. Expressing sentences using negatives, refer to it as litotes. Then synecdoche, where a part is used to represent a whole, or whole is used to represent a part. And in the poem we have 6 hands at open doors. Feet kicking empty wineskins. So obviously, not just hands at open doors, the whole body, the full human being, 6 people, but the poet is representing it with just hands or feet. Actually, full human being is doing the kicking, but the poet is representing it with just the feet, as though feet alone can kick. but it cannot. So we have anaphora. And the nights, what have you, and the cities, postal, continue, and the villages, dirty, continued. So anaphora is repetition of a word or a phrase at the beginning of sentences. So we see this and the repeated in sentences next to each other. That's anaphora. Then we have alliteration, repetition of similar consonant sounds in words that are close to each other at the beginning of the words. So we have cold coming, thought day, sleeping in snatches, so repetition of similar consonant sounds at the beginning of words that are close to each other in sentences is alliteration. Then we also have rhetorical question. Questions that are not meant to be answered. Were we led for a bet? For a birth or death? It's a rhetorical question. So these are some of the poetic devices used by the poet in the journey of the Magi. Now we answer questions on the poem. So we answer questions on the poem Journey of the Magi. The Magi are aided on their way by horses, camels, chariots, donkeys. According to the poem, they were aided by camels. The Magi, as used in the poem, is a biblical allusion to the 3 Hebrew boys, 3 prophets, 3 wise men, all of the above. We have 3 wise men. Cold coming, as used in line 1, is an example of metaphor, euphemism, alliteration, onomatopoeia. So we have repeated consonant sounds in starting both words. So we have alliteration. Same consonants beginning both words close to each other. We refer to that as alliteration. The tone of the first and second stanza of the poem is repulsive, narrative, explanatory, argumentative. The tone is narrative. The first and second stanza explains the journey, how they got to infant baby Jesus. So it was narrative, narrating the experiences they passed through on their way to the baby. The first stanza of the poem depicts the journey as an influential factor, hazards of the journey, increment of the fortune of pilgrims, blind acceptance of fate. It depicts the hazards of the journey, the hazards that the Magi had to go through to get to the baby. So that's it for the journey of the Magi. But there are other questions on the O3 Schools JAMB app. So do not to download and get access to all the amazing features that the app has to offer, and you're well on your way to that dream score for any exams that you are preparing for.